It's been 70 years since the first nuclear bomb was tested right here in New Mexico. The Trinity site near Alamogordo was open to visitors last week. Local media reported on protests by some nearby residents who say they continue to suffer health problems decades later from the nuclear test. Now, Tularosa Basin downwinders are the descendants of people who were living in the area at the time. They want more acknowledgement from the government and research into cancer clusters in those communities near the site. We have a great panel with us today to talk about the issue and many more. Tom Garrity with the Garrity Group PR. John Wertheim, a former New Mexico Democratic Party chairman's here. Sophie Martin, an attorney and editor of DukeCityFix.com. And Phil Marquez, president of Talk Radio Inc. Now, John, one thing that protesters are seeking is financial compensation. It's always a tough go when it's this long. You got to prove a lot of things. Where do the legal standings sit right now?
Yeah, you know, that is really tough, although it's not impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, and because especially any of the harm that occurred during the whole Manhattan Project, and that occurred in a number of states.
Right.
Of course, New Mexico was most impacted because we were the testing site. But all of that is very old. And so there's been compensation schemes within the last 15, 20 years dealing with a lot of the toxicity issues at Los Alamos in the Manhattan Project proper. And so I don't think that theoretically it's impossible for Congress at all to create a separate fund. Likely they would pull it out of the courts. And they would create kind of a separate fund that you would apply to so that maybe you'd have some relaxed standards or something like that.
Is that similar to what happened with the uranium folks out in the western part of our state? Was that a similar dynamic you just said?
That's very similar.
Okay.
Because especially Congress tends to want to get it out of the court system and out from attorney's fees. They even did that with the Cerro Grande fire, for example. There were real limited attorney's fees. So one of the solutions would be to get it out of the normal court process. Because in a normal lawsuit, proving the causation from the tests to whatever kind of cancers are being experienced or whatever would be very, very difficult to prove in court.
Sophie, it's complicated, isn't it? It really is what John's just describing.
It is, and one of the things that the downwinders, as they're often referred to, have asked for is additional research.
Right.
Now, we do have a fair amount of research as to the effects of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and what we see there, and I think this is to John's issue of how do you prove causation, is beyond the people who were affected in those cities from the initial blast, there was about a 10-year wait before they started to see the cancers pop up in the communities, and then there's a second generation effect.
Gotcha.
And so we really are looking at a pretty long period of time during which cancers, leukemia, thyroid issues, all of that start to spring up in the population. We see that research in Japan, not just from Japanese scholars, but from scholars here, researchers here in the US, but we don't seem to have that level of research for our own community here.
Tom, it's interesting. I'd be embittered if just getting to the research part took so long, because people people are passing away from these things. There's less folks to talk about the family history. And so any delay is a problem for these folks. You can't blame people for wanting to get this going.
Yeah, I mean, the Tularosa downwinders have been very good at getting their message out. Unfortunately, their window of opportunity is only when Trinity site opens 2 times a year.
Right.
And there have been a number of different types of documentaries and long format stories, on their plight. But it's very unfortunate that their concerns appear anyway not to be taken seriously by the federal government.
Exactly. Phil Marquez, good to see you, by the way. It's been a long time. Glad you're here.
Great to be here.
People are suffering. Right? A lot of New Mexicans are suffering from this. But on the other side of it, what's interesting is there's a lot of pride to go along with our role in this whole situation, and Trinity specifically. How do we balance those two emotional needs here? It's a very difficult thing.
Well, I think when you consider the fact that these are the bombs that would land on Hiroshima and the fact that the damage that was done to these people right then, like Ed Sophie said earlier. But the fact is that these people need to be compensated.
Yeah.
Downwind, children with problems, when they have children that have defects. These things are affecting generations. And I think the congressmen and senators from those areas need to get very involved.
You just anticipated a question soon to you, John, on this. The delegation, it's certainly not doing nothing. They're doing something, but it seems like this is the moment for the delegation to really drive something forward.
Well, and the delegation has a lot of experience dealing with it. I mean, Senator Udall was critical in getting the uranium compensation through, and so other members of the delegation as well. And so we're used to dealing with this. I mean, this is kind of the sacrifice that the state of New Mexico made, a patriotic sacrifice there are a lot of estimates. Historians estimate that 1 million lives were, American lives were saved, servicemen's lives were saved by avoiding the invasion of Japan. And there's a very controversial topic about, the dropping of the bombs on Japan, but I can tell you, having known people who served in the armed forces during World War II back in my past, if you talk with them, they feel like the bombs kept them from having to invade Japan. And so it is a patriotic duty for us to recognize that there are a lot of costs. I would also point out that the level of knowledge was virtually nil when they tested the atomic bomb. And so, for example, a famous physicist, mathematician named Johnny von Neumann, who basically invented modern models of computation, he died of cancer in the 1950s, probably from his own witnessing all of these tests. And so the fact of the matter is there were bets running about whether the whole world was going to disappear when they dropped that bomb at Trinity.
Right.
And we'd had zero knowledge base about the health effects
Sure.
of radiation at that stage, and so we really need to make good on it.
Absolutely. And then so, you think about, you read about the things at the time nobody was told. They were told it was a munitions explosion.
They were told it was something completely different.
And folks could be forgiven, to John's point, a lot of ignorance at the time. But it seems to me the government has to step very firmly forward here and say, all right, there's a line in the sand. No more suffering. We're going to have some answers for folks here. Is there anything less than that that's going to be satisfactory for downwinders? It just
No. And my fear, and this is something that we've heard at the table already. My fear is that that there is a tendency to kind of wait it out. Now we've seen pushes in other parts of the country where populations of people have been experimented on more directly, and that has been highly emotional. But I think that we need to recognize that this population was also experimented on, maybe not wittingly, certainly not on their part, but not wittingly in terms of the scientists involved, but it did happen. And so we need to acknowledge that.